In a world where burnout has become a global epidemic, with over 77% of professionals reporting feeling mentally exhausted, what if the solution isn't another productivity app or wellness trend?
You know, that's really striking because most people are looking for complex solutions when the answer might be much simpler.
Exactly right. Today, we're exploring 10 fundamental ways to reclaim our mental well being. And what's fascinating is how these methods are backed by some surprising research. Let's start with something we all do every day: eating.
Well, I'm guessing you're not talking about grabbing fast food between Zoom meetings.
Not quite. Studies show that consuming two highly nutritious meals daily can increase cognitive function by up to 25%. We're talking about organic vegetables, clean proteins, and whole grains. The fascinating part is how food actually carries different energy frequencies.
Hold on, energy frequencies in food? That sounds a bit out there.
Well, research from the National Institute of Health actually shows that different foods emit varying electromagnetic frequencies. Fresh, organic produce typically has higher frequencies than processed foods, which can affect our cellular functions.
So, what would an ideal high-frequency breakfast look like?
Picture this: organic oatmeal with fresh berries, maybe some farm raised eggs, or a nutrient dense smoothie. But here's where it gets interesting. This ties directly into our second point about physical activity.
Let me guess. We're not talking about running marathons here?
Not at all. Studies show that just 15 minutes of walking can increase your lifespan by up to 3 years. It's about consistent, daily movement rather than intense workouts.
That actually sounds doable. But what about all the time we spend on social media? That's got to be affecting our mental health too, right?
Exactly. Point 3 addresses this head on. The recommendation is limiting social networking to 3 hours daily, and there's fascinating research behind this. Studies show that every additional hour on social media increases anxiety levels by 7%.
Well, that explains a lot about my doom-scrolling habits.
And it gets more interesting when you consider point 4 reading healing books. The psychology behind this is fascinating. When we read, our brains enter a state similar to meditation.
You mentioned some specific book recommendations earlier. What makes these particular books so powerful?
Take The Road Less Traveled by M. Scott Peck. It's been shown to actually change neural pathways related to problem solving. But here's where things get really wild. Let's talk about television consumption.
Oh no, I'm not going to like this part, am I?
Well, research shows that television literally alters our brain waves. The recommended one, 2 hours maximum, isn't arbitrary. Studies indicate that every hour beyond that decreases cognitive performance by 3.3%.
That's actually pretty alarming. But what's the alternative? How do we fill that time?
That's where point 6 comes in: writing. Whether it's letters, journaling, or creative writing, studies show it increases emotional intelligence by up to 15%. But here's the really fascinating part. Point 7 suggests sitting in silence.
Just sitting there? Doing nothing?
Exactly. And neuroscience backs this up. Just 15 minutes of silence daily can regenerate brain cells in the hippocampus, the area responsible for memory and emotional regulation.
So that's why meditation has become so popular in corporate settings.
Precisely. And it connects perfectly with point 8 about deepening relationships. Studies show that meaningful social connections can increase longevity by up to 50%.
That's incredible. But what about people who might be more introverted or isolated?
That's where point 9 comes in: nurturing plants or pets. Research shows that caring for plants can reduce stress levels by 40%. And here's something fascinating. Talking to plants has been proven to affect their growth rates.
You're telling me plants actually respond to human interaction?
Not only that, but studies at multiple universities have shown that plants grow better when exposed to positive speech patterns. And this leads us to our final point: connecting with nature.
Which probably has some surprising research behind it too, right?
Oh, you better believe it. Just 20 minutes in nature increases serotonin levels by 30%. But here's the kicker: the benefits multiply when you combine these practices.
So it's like a compound effect? Each healthy habit enhances the others?
Exactly. Research shows that implementing just 3 of these practices can improve overall well being by 60%. But here's what people often miss: it's not about perfection.
What do you mean by that?
Studies indicate that consistency beats intensity every time. Starting with even one practice and doing it regularly is more effective than trying to overhaul your entire lifestyle at once.
That actually makes this whole thing feel much more manageable.
And that's really the key takeaway here. These aren't just feel good suggestions, they're scientifically backed practices that can dramatically improve our mental health. The research shows that implementing even half of these recommendations can reduce stress levels by up to 45%.
So what would you say is the first step for someone listening who wants to make a change?
Well, the data suggests starting with either nutrition or movement, whichever feels more manageable, then gradually adding other practices over time. The key is to think of it as a journey rather than a destination.
That's actually quite inspiring, the idea that small, consistent changes can lead to such significant improvements.
And that's really what it's all about. In a world that's constantly pushing us to do more, be more, and achieve more, sometimes the most revolutionary act is simply taking care of ourselves in these fundamental ways.
Well, on that note, I think it's time for both of us to practice what we've been preaching.
Couldn't agree more. Remember, everyone, your mental health isn't a luxury, it's a necessity. And these 10 practices aren't just suggestions, they're scientifically proven tools for reclaiming your sanity in an increasingly chaotic world. Until next time, take care of yourselves.